2025, I sold over $1 million worth of product on Amazon. This is episode 3 of scaling my business to $3 million in 2026. Now, before we go any further, there's one quick thing I want to mention. If you want the same tracking sheet that I'm using to scale from 1 to 3 million in this series, you can grab it for free in the link in the description below. Once you sign up, the sheet gets emailed to you automatically, where you can then download and make a copy for yourself. And you also get access to my weekly newsletter. I share tons of sauce each week, and I just actually shared this week on how I lost $500,000 in 2025. So you should definitely give it a read. I think you'll learn something from it. All right, let's get into this week's numbers. All right, so instead of jumping right into the Google Sheet, I actually wrote down some notes here in a Google Doc. Why I did this is because I want to show you guys each week our progression, and then also give the big picture as to where we are on the month, just so that you can see the progression each week. Because I understand if you didn't watch the previous episode or you weren't tapped in prior to that, it might be hard to follow along. So I just decided to do it this way. So as you can see for this week here, it's the 8th to the 14th. We have bought 590 units with an average cost of goods of about $28.83, an average sale price of about $49.11, and alongside that, we have 27 unique ASINs. So this is definitely a lot different from last week, where we had about 65 unique ASINs, so you can definitely tell the spending has slowed a bit. Moving on to ROI, we have about 23.64%. with a 13.87% margin. So that is averaged across all the units that we bought this week, which is going to result in an estimated sales of almost $29,000, a spend of $17,000, and profits of about $4,000. And just so you guys can see the difference visually, last week we actually made almost $9,500 at 57,000 estimated sales, while this week we are unfortunately about half of that. So not only did spend slow down, but certainly so did our margin, our profits, just really overall a slow week. And we're going to get into why that is. Okay, so now we are here in Google Sheets, and we're actually going to be able to see the overall progression that was made this week. So we can see where our current numbers stand on the entire month. We are looking at a 28% ROI, a 15.6% margin, which is actually a lot higher than I thought it would be. We have about $92,000 roughly in estimated sales, with about a 52 grand if we want to round up spend, and then also about $14,500 in profit. You can see here that our overall units was about 1,700. So last week we ended at about 1,000 and some change. So again, it's unfortunate that we weren't able to just continue doubling up. We did fall a little bit short of 1,000 units this week. And we can see here that ACOG is at $30.25 and our ASP is at $53.86. Now, I'm very pleased to see that these numbers have remained the same, because I want to continue selling higher ticketed goods. It's just more valuable for my time, my team's time, and overall keeps the operation moving a lot more efficiently. It's a lot easier to scale when you're selling higher ticketed goods as opposed to low ticket items. So that's great. And as you guys can see here, that this is on the 14th. So the sheet is fully updated with our expectations. So let's get into how much we should have spent, we should have sold, and we should have made at the end of this 14-day period. So if we come over to our needed tab here in H4, we can actually see that we needed to spend about pretty much $58,000. We unfortunately fell about $6,000 short of that. Now, there is some spend that is currently on hold. You can see there's quite a lot that's awaiting shipment right now. So I estimate that this would be roughly around 53 to 54,000 in actualized spend, which would still put us about 3 to 4 grand short. So unfortunately, we didn't meet the mark for the daily spend goal or weekly spend goal this week. However, we can see our profits are actually still protected, because we're sourcing at a much higher margin than we did expect. So our difference is actually in our favor of about $427, which is putting us at about that 14,380 number, or about $14,500. Estimated sales, I obviously don't track as something I need, just because it's a dynamic changing number based on your spend and your profit. So not something that I track. But if we wanted to keep it simple, if we want to sell $230,000 and we are at 92,000, we're probably just a little short there as well. However, we still should hit a revenue goal of about 200K, which ultimately is my goal for this year, is just to hit 200K month over month, and then literally do almost $1 million in December alone. So we're looking okay there. Again, we have some stuff on hold. If we come to the right over here, quite a lot of stuff. I actually could go ahead and total up the amount of spend just to see what we're at. So it looks like we are, yeah, so about 3 grand is on hold right now. So if that gives you a rough idea of how short we fell this week, not too bad, but definitely we need to keep foot on the gas and make sure that for next week I try and recover some of that. So now let's go ahead and move on to our projections after our returns. So we're looking at about 1,700 units sold. Again, these are all numbers just pulled from the date sheet there. And we can see that our total profit after returns drops to about 11,950, which originally was looking at about 14 grand. We can also see that our final profit margin, pre-return and after return, is pretty much sitting at about 13%. So coming down from an expected 15.6%, we are looking after returns at about a 3.22%, which is still good. We're still holding strong. The goal is just to keep that really above 10. Roughly, I would say 11% though, just because we have to now go to our net projections, which we're going to get into now. Okay, so with this now adjusted, we can see that I paid $768 in payroll, $120 in employee bonuses, $277 software, $135 in losses, $56 in storage. So our total overhead comes out to be about $1,300 and some change for the first 2 weeks of January, which is going to leave us with a net profit now from basically 12 grand to $10,500 and a net margin of 11.72%. So again, still on track. The goal is really to make more than 20K a month and to also be able to maintain about 200K revenue a month. So we're still looking on pace for that. So all in all, not a bad week, but I'm definitely going to get into some lessons that I learned this week, which did actually allow me to spend more money than if I didn't do it. So we'll talk about that in a second. All right, so now that we went over our projected numbers for what's to come, we can actually look at what we feasibly made this week. So here on Seller Board, we are looking at about a gross profit of about $4,600. We sold almost 40 grand this week and sold about 700 units. Alongside that, our refunds are still sky high. They did go down marginally from last week. I think last week we were at about 8.5% to 9%. We are at 7% with a 50% sellable rate right now. So things are looking up. We just have to continue selling and buying more products, and that again will just come down naturally. And you can see here that a gross margin we are looking at right now is 12%, which is definitely low. And we also are looking at a 20% ROI. Refunds again are a very big cause of this issue. You guys can also see here that we didn't have as much of an explosive week as last week in terms of like units sold on one major SKU. It was much more spread out this week. Last week it was healthy as well, but we had some ASINs that were sort of outliers. So stuff that was selling, more than 100 times in the week. But we can see this week we've still had a lot of good sellers, just more diversified and more spread out. So all in all, pretty standard. Okay, so coming to the calculator here, first thing we're going to want to do to get our net numbers from this 4,600 is we are going to want to take our prep rate, which is about $1.30 on average a unit, going to multiply that by how many units were sold this week. So we're looking at about $921 in prep, which we're going to go ahead and take off this gross profit. So now we can see after prep, we're looking at about 3,700 in profit, but we still need to actually take off some of the overhead we paid this week. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick, and I'll cut back when I have the final number. Okay, and what I did to actually go and find how much we paid in overhead this week is I actually just changed our input date here back to just a week's worth of overhead. So we're looking at about $678.30. The cool thing with this sheet is if you actually change it back, you can see it just updates automatically. So it's really easy to see exactly how much you're paying each week, each day, whatever the case may be. So now we are going to add $678.30, which is going to give us a final profit this week of 3,000 and some change. So basically consistent. This is pretty much what we made last week. This was 3,000 and some change as well. So store is looking consistent. Again, we just got to get the refund rate lower. Now let's find our net profit margin, so then you guys can also see that. Okay, so to get our net margin here, we're just going to take our net profit divided by the amount we sold this week, which I believe it's going to be sub 10%, closer to 8 or 9. So yeah, we're looking at pretty much knocking on the door of 8%. Again, due to refunds, just got to deal with it. But overall, I can't complain too much. I mean, it's what I expected. We are on pace this month for about 150K in sales, which I'm going to cut and show you now. So we can see here that we are already at 75K in sales, and this is just on the 14th of January. So we actually have 17 days left of being able to sell product. And if we want to get our final numbers to see what we've actually made this month so far, I can go ahead and do that, and I will show you guys what we're looking at profit-wise as well. Okay, and totaling up our overhead plus the amount we've paid in prep so far, we're actually looking at about $6,300 in profit in the first 14 days of this month. And if we take that and divide it by 14 days, we've actually made about $450 in profit a day for January, which is not bad. This comes out to just roughly 15K. So it looks like it's about 14K, which again isn't great. Definitely not where I want to be, but for the start of the year, I can't complain considering half my inventory isn't even where it needs to be, which is like checked in, selling at Amazon. That's like sort of for external reasons, but Also because we sold a lot of FBM in December. So not too bad. We're on a good pace. All right. So we've seen the numbers. Now it's time to talk about what I was actually doing this week in order to get to where I got and what I plan to do for next week. So this week I worked a lot on just trying to push spend. As you guys saw from the numbers, it was definitely a letdown from last week. So having a slower week ahead, I just know that it's going to be something that I have to continue to do. I also went ahead and took a couple calls with my team this week. We went through some very critical data points, which I actually do want to screen share with you guys and show you in a second. But basically what we went ahead and discussed was our order cancel rate is atrocious this month. It is probably 30% or more. And for me, that is just not typical. I typically, within the last 6 months, the data showed me that I've been getting cancel rates at about 16.5%. So to see that that number is spiked so much is just not great and was something that I had to internally look at and get all the data for. So what I went ahead and did was I let ChatGPT scrape through my last 6 months of inventory, and he basically was able to pull a sheet for me that shows each supplier, how often they canceled per month out of how many orders went successful. And then we also have a general trend data, which can tell us that, hey, in July, maybe we got canceled 50% of the time. And then in October, we were down to like 5%. And based on that trend, we were obviously doing things right to work with that supplier properly. So it helps us execute better for the future. Now, why did I actually make this? Well, not only was I disappointed at our cancel rate, which I think I have a big part to play in that. Sometimes when you're trying to shoot for spend goals, you just end up forcing spend, not on bad products, but just trying to push the limits as much as you can. And sometimes that obviously leads to operational drag. The reason why cancels is such a big deal for me, at least, is because not only did I have to work just as hard to go and find more leads, but so did my sourcer. And then on the back end, my admin team literally has to go and then follow up with every order cancel, make sure it's all refunded. And if it doesn't get refunded, then we have gift cards that can go missing. It's just a lot to deal with. And by getting this number down, it's going to help literally everyone on the team. So I'm not going to get too deep into this, but I am going to go over just the main parts of the sheet, which is going to be this supplier summary tab here. So what we can see is I have basically listed out a 6-month data trend of each supplier that I was buying from during this time. And what I was doing was getting the total attempts that we tried, the total number of cancels we got, and then the overall cancel percentage that each supplier was causing us. And this is over a 6-month time period. So now if we look into the specifics, chat actually went ahead and gave me the percentages for each supplier for each specific month. And we can see here based on the trend, if it's low data, if it's flat, if it's worsening, if it's improving, right? These are all metrics that me and my team are taking into account to make sure that we're properly nurturing these suppliers moving forward. We can also see that I listed a type. So if a supplier is considered banned, if it's capped or manageable, if it's high risk, if they're low data, if I think one is recoverable. So let's say that I got banned on a supplier a while ago and I want to give another stab at it, or I think that there's a way we can get them back to full capacity. That's what recoverable is. We have reliable suppliers, and then we also have places where we need to be more responsible about placing orders. Now that stuff is mainly for my sourcing VA, because if you guys have ever hired a sourcing VA, and I'm sure you've ran into this, the problem is that they find leads, they do good on the charts, whatever, but the actual buying process of those leads is something that they don't understand. So if they don't understand that orders can be canceled at any time due to whatever reason that they're not aware of, you're going to get a lot of leads that are not actually buyable. And we're going to get into my sourcing VA's buyable percentage here in a second, because this is why I made this sheet, is that I want to get that metric up. And overall, this stuff isn't his fault. It's just something that now we have to teach, because it's clearly taking up a big portion of his leads. So as you guys have already been able to read, I'm sure if you pause the video at all, this is just basically the criteria I am allowing him to submit leads on based on categorization of each supplier, so that anything he submits is getting bought. If we come to the month totals here, what I ended up doing was I actually just made sure that we got a general outlook of all the cancels. We can see that I have cancel rates from all 6 months, which averages that out to 16.5% cancel rate, which isn't bad, but this month is definitely going to spike that up, and I need to get the target below 15%. And then finally, we have month times supplier cancel rate. So this is just more in the weeds, right? This is just going to show basically for every supplier how many cancels we had each month in correlation to successful orders placed, to give us an idea of if there were any patterns that cannot be caught here for whatever reason, just to get more in the weeds. And this is more of like the back end that chat scraped. So mainly the cool stuff, I guess, to look at is going to be on the supplier summary and the month totals. Now, moving on to what I was talking about with my sourcing VA, right? So what I noticed is that a lot of his stuff wasn't getting bought, and it's not necessarily necessarily because they were bad leads. It's just because I couldn't buy them due to a lot of times with supplier constraints. So we can see here I've listed out the 4 reasons as to why I wouldn't be able to buy a lead from my sourcing VA. And we clearly here have analysis, supplier issues, quality control, and gray areas. We can see all the definitions here. Just to go over them in short, gray areas is more of a one-off thing. Quality control is things like IP complaints, just the general stuff that you should know as a sourcer. Supplier issues is a given, pretty obvious there. And then analysis is just the entire analysis process. And what I did was I ended up scraping more data for him to figure out where do we have to improve and work for this week, because this is a lot of what my training is going to lead moving forward. And I'm not going to go over this stuff and bore you guys too much, but the biggest thing that we're trying to pay attention to is the total number of leads he submitted in comparison to what's been bought. So he submitted 80 leads and 48 of these have not been bought due to whatever reason here on the left. And we can see that that makes his hit rate about 40%, but his purchase rate is only 13.75, which is way too low. And if you guys have a sourcing VA, I highly recommend you actually look through this stuff, because it's the only way you're going to make a VA better is with data. I know a lot of times we try and get emotional and feel like they're not working hard enough or whatever, but like if you guys don't have data to figure out why they're not improving, then they're never going to improve. And what we can see here based on the categories I ran is that about half of his stuff not getting a hit rate acceptance is because of analysis, and then it breaks down past the other ones. So stuff like quality control and supplier issues is what I'm actually looking to cut out. Reason why is because for analysis, if we come over here, I listed some subcategories, and the biggest thing that I need to work on for him this week is the velocity and sales rank side of things, which we're going to touch on that in a second with what I plan to do moving forward there. But that's causing almost 50% of his analysis issues. And the thing with VAs, man, is like I'm not looking to have him at 100% hit rate. For me, if he can actually have a buyable rate of 30%, that's totally fine for me. That basically means 1 in every 3 leads he sends me is going to get bought, which is perfectly fine. So I'm just looking to cut out a lot of the fat that I haven't yet due to him still being so new, because you got to remember he's only been with me since October, so that's only 4 months. So I'm going to try and eliminate a lot of the external factors, which over time he's just going to get better with analysis as he does it more. What we have here is the post-tiered statistics. So anything submitted here was just leads in general, right? So I had to also look at the 32 leads that were accepted and figure out why there's such a big discrepancy between the buy rate and the hit rate. So that's what this here is for. We have 32 submitted leads here. 18 were assigned a tier, which means that in his first week, he had about 18 out of 32 leads that were given a thumbs up, and then only 8 of those got bought. So not to confuse you guys or anything, but this up here just goes over this set of data here. I got bored one night and was like, hey, I got to run this data. So I did it. But we can see here, this is on a more structured week. So last week, this is the numbers here. And then the biggest issue was the 10 leads that didn't get bought were actually due to supplier issues. So we can see here that these are major problems. And that ultimately is obviously going to just boost his hit rate up more and more, the more he can understand order cancels and supplier issues. And then going back to the subcategories with quality control, just to run this over, we can see here that part of it was because we already have stock on some stuff, which right now he's not allowed to submit anything I'm selling. I did that as a blanket rule early on just to make it easy for him to find me new products. But now we're getting to the point where if he's going to start taking over things like replens, repricing, manual sourcing, brand sourcing, he needs to understand this stuff, because if he doesn't, then he's never going to be able to do it for me, which means I'm always going to have to be working in the business and not on the business. All right, so you guys were able to actually see the analysis I ran on not only our cancels, but why the VA submitted leads were not getting bought enough. So now I want to talk how I'm going to move forward into next week. So what I plan to do is we're going to do meetings once a day. He works 5 days a week right now. So literally every day he's on, we're taking a 1-hour call. What we're going to go over in these calls is for him to be able to read analysis on a much deeper level to determine days of stock. So now he's going to be able to learn forecasting to understand when he has to do replens, his repricing, all that stuff is going to get banged out right now. So then in the future, it's a lot easier to just transition him smoothly. And not only that, him being able to conceptualize this will make it much more motivating for him, because he is paid on a commission basis. However, we do it in a tiered structure. So my sourcing VA actually doesn't get paid a flat rate. He gets paid in accordance to how well the products he's finding are. So for instance, if he finds a really banger product, he gets double the money than he does if he finds just a regular product. So because he's incentivized to do better with a better performance, it's very important that he understands also on a much intricate level what actually moves the needle, which is obviously spend. If we're not spending money, then none of this stuff matters, and neither does how many leads he finds if they're either not buyable or we can't do much with them. One more thing I'm looking to do for this week is take more meetings. So specifically with my head of operations, which is like my my admin manager, I guess you could say. What we're going to do there is we're just going to go over a software which handles our removals and such. We're just basically going to integrate her with that so that she knows how to do it and I don't have to touch it anymore. And then finally, I also assigned the head of operations manager to teach my admin, so my admin employee, how to place orders just like she does. We're going to start by just having the admin place very simple orders, so credit card only, no gift cards, so that she doesn't have to do any of that complicated math, and then just simple orders where it's like, hey, buy 5 units, buy 10 units, check out. Reason why is because you don't want to be in a spot where you don't have coverage if one of your VAs has to take the day off or something happens. You just want to be able to have that protected, and that's something I want to get integrated now so that when bad things happen, I'm already prepared. So that's everything that we're looking forward to this week. I guess something that I learned and some struggles and talking points was overall just spend. Spend was a little bit hard this week, again, due to it being slower. But one thing I certainly will say is if you guys went ahead and took a look at episode 2, you will notice that we had a very, very high margin in comparison to the target 13%. We were actually sitting at about 16.5%. As somebody who's trying to move the needle as far as possible, you have to understand your targets and where you're trying to aim. And that's what I did this week. I'm way over target right now, which means that I'm probably not spending enough. So I was able to drop my minimum margin when sourcing this week to about a 10 to 11%, which is what allowed me to still push 20 to 25K in spend. Had I not done that, I would have literally spent only 10K this week and it would have looked like we made no money. So sometimes when it comes to breaking your margin rules, you just have to look at it on how much is this going to move the needle and do I actually need this spend? And this isn't something that I would say is like you're forcing a purchase, because I know people love to say that if you use spend goals and you use spend trackers that you end up forcing buys. And I think in the beginning, yes, but once you get experience and you know what's a good product from a bad product, margin alone does not determine that. Margin is just another factor that is considerable, but if you have a good chart in front of you, if you have something that moves, you need to be taking the chances, especially if you have padding behind you, which is what we had this week. So that's a learning lesson for you guys that I can give you is do not be afraid to spend money on lower margin stuff. I wouldn't recommend going below 10%, but I was able to spend about 15 to 20K just off of lower margin stuff this week, which makes me way more money than had I not spent that money in the first place. And one more thing I forgot to mention was something that I want to do next week is I was tampering around with some of our reconciliation systems as well. And I noticed that right now, the way we do it through Sheets is a pretty inefficient way of doing it just because we have to track all of our gift cards in a sheet. And if we buy multiple gift cards in one order from a gift card supplier, then it makes it very hard to reconcile that if an order gets canceled or we're not getting our refund back, because everything that is in a multiple gift card purchase is just in one tab and it's in notes within Sheets. So I actually had a coaching student of mine send me his AI prompt that he used to basically make his own dashboard for gift cards, which is actually really cool to see that a coaching student has a better system than I do for this stuff. So I'm going to be playing around with that this week and seeing if I can get my own dashboard up, which would make reconciling so much easier. Not only would it save time for the VAs, but also it'd make sure that everything is fully accurate, which it already is now, but it just requires a lot more following up. So that's another thing that I want to work on in my free time this week, and we'll see how that goes. All right, and that is pretty much everything I wanted to touch on this week. A lot of different areas of the business that was covered, I felt like. This is starting to become the realistic side of running an OA business, so I really hope you guys are enjoying it to this point. And that pretty much covers everything in this one, so I'll catch you guys for episode 4. Peace out.